When I was told I had to give a health equity talk, my first thoughts were that I was going to stand in front of you guys, and it was really going to be about me showing you guys my projects. Like, look at the data, look at what I've been able to do, look at what I've been able to accomplish thanks to the incredible work we did here together for 1 year. But as interesting as this program has always been, we were given outlines, and again, we were told, think from your heart, follow your soul, and just tell us what you want to talk about when it concerns health equity. And so I did a lot of deep reflection. I think my talk today would really focus on my personal transformative journey in leadership, moving from a dark place to a place of light. And so I am Azua Ekokobe Wilfred. I'm a medical doctor. I come from Cameroon in West Africa. I specifically come from a tribe. It's called the Bangwas, and our clan is called Inke. So Inke, in my native language, actually means light. And we were called this way because in my local place, we were known for being very productive. And the truth is that the secret of our productivity was actually because we had a particular culture which was passed from our ancestors. When you succeed in my clan, you have a responsibility to hold the next person who is not succeeding and ensure that that person succeeds. And this had been passed from one generation to another. And it was embodied in my parents, my mom and my dad. I could clearly see how much they tried as hard as possible to make sure that within our community, people who were not succeeding enough would always succeed. And so they would go out of their way to give back to the community to make a difference. Especially my mom and my dad. I think I lost my mom when I was still quite young as a teenager. She died from a sudden cardiac arrest. It was painful for me, but the death of my dad was, I think, the one that completely broke me down. I lost my dad. He was a renowned doctor. Known a lot for the work he did to help people. I think within my clan, he was named Nkem Nkengachisonge, which means the peacemaker. And one of the things he did so much was always giving more than even what he had. And his death was kind of different because he had a cancer. My dad died of a liver cancer. And most of us here know what cancer does. It literally eats you up. It was diagnosed late, and I had to see my dad go through all the processes of literally getting broken down. When he was diagnosed with a liver cancer, it was really late, and we started seeing the signs manifest on my dad. Back then, I was a medical student. He was my inspiration of why I wanted to be a doctor. And so as a medical student back then, when I started seeing what was happening, it was difficult for me. He retired. He came back home to our local town. And he opened a very small clinic. I think he had a staff of about 5 people who he used to work with. And what liver cancer does when it starts getting towards the end stage is that it makes people get tired. Usually they have some pain. But also in addition, the liver has a key function where it produces some proteins. And so usually if your liver is not working well, you can't produce those proteins anymore. And usually you start having swellings. And typically, usually it starts with the abdomen. And this was the case of my dad. And so, just the way I always smile, my dad had a similar smile. I would see him every day smiling, but, deep within he was going through a lot of pain. And his abdomen was getting swollen. He would wear these clothes to cover it up and smile and go down to the clinic, consult close to 50 people every day, come back home smiling, feeling very happy. I had a glimpse that something was wrong, but I did not know the extent to which things were wrong. But during those periods, as a medical student, every time anything came to the clinic, I was the first person who would run to first of all see what's happening, and out of excitement, I'll come and tell my dad, hey, we have a case here. It looks like a case of this. I think maybe we could try this, try that. And together we'll run down and try to see the patient. And so one of these days, there was this particular woman who came with a low abdominal pain. And I was very excited. It was a case that I read something around, and I just wanted to tell my father what I felt. So I ran into his room, I opened the door, it was around 2 a.m., and I saw my dad. It's a procedure in medicine, we call it paracentesis. So those who have ascites, like the swollen abdomen, you use like a tube, and you connect it to drain the fluid. And my dad would literally sit in his room and do this by himself. So I barged that day into the room, and I saw him during the procedure, and that was the moment when I knew how serious his condition was. It was a very painful experience for me, and my first instinct was to run back to the clinic and tell the patient to go to another hospital because my dad was not well. But he walked up to me and said, no, we have to go and see the patient. And so we went down to the clinic, we saw the patient, and within the consultation, the routine consultation, I just got so emotional, so I left. And after he finished working on the patient, after patching up himself, he came and he met me and he said, Wilfred, I'm okay. Let's go back. Everything is fine. And my dad passed away on the 31st of October, 2014. But it left with me a broken person. The pain I had was a pain of feeling I had a hero who gave so much to the community, but when he needed the community, they were not there for him. I felt people were not honest. Friendship was not an honest thing. The notion of community didn't even make any sense to me. And so I reverted to a concept of individualism. It's all about you in your life. Think about yourself, figure out your thing, try to be as good as possible because nobody cares about you. You're just on your own. And for some people who know me here, they know I still have some of those scars. Most often, it's difficult for me to comprehend why somebody would just want to help me, why somebody would just want to probably invest in me. I always try to look at things beyond to see, is there some angle of manipulation or exploitation? It comes from some of these scars. And at times I see some of this as well in communities that have been colonized. There is a scar that it always lives in them. And so basically I was a broken person when I lost my dad. And from then I resorted to what most young adults do when they are broken. I got into drinking, I got into partying, I got into video games. It was some of these things that I felt would give me some little amount of an escape from the pain I felt from losing my dad. Because of this, I pushed people away. I didn't want to have anything to do with community, friendship. I preferred to just figure out my way and build on my excellence. And I graduated from medical school. I started working. And I think my first revelation was the death of a little toddler. Her name was Samira. Samira's story is so personal to me because she had a similar smile to my dad. And she was so full of life, 3-year-old. And the day she passed away, they called me. I came to their house and I watched her. And I was just so inquisitive to understand what had happened to this smiling young girl that I was so in love with. And when the family told me they could not afford to go to the closest hospital, I felt some sort of a responsibility because I felt like we had a local clinic, which I had closed, by the way, because the clinic gave me so many memories of my dad and I didn't even want to look at that clinic anymore. So I closed the clinic. But the death of Samira, I felt some responsibility to what had happened because I felt like if the clinic was functional, this would probably not have happened to her. But I also started understanding that my concept of medicine, where I felt like to be a good doctor with my individualistic mindset, I just had to study so hard, be so good at understanding people's problems. And I sit in my office and when a patient comes in, I can diagnose what's wrong with the person, I treat the person and the person is happy and I'm good. But then at that moment, I started realizing that there are certain people who stay back in communities for different reasons, and I won't be able to see them. And there was a problem around this. And so Samira's death was the first awakening to my mind that in the practice of medicine, that individualistic mindset is a very limited mindset. But fast forward, I was sent to a government hospital where I started practicing as a doctor, but almost every patient I lost was the same presentation. And of course, they came with different clinical presentations, but the presentation that was unique with all my patients was that they came from far-off communities. And so because of the challenges they had, the distance they had to move to the hospital, lack of finances, cultural barriers that we all know, they would always come in a very terrible state. And again, I had these patients who would die in front of me because they came from far-off communities. And so for a young man who was coming from so much pain, the pain of losing my dad, the pain of losing patients, and for somebody who was very individualistic, I became extremely depressed. I just kept everything within me. I had nobody to talk to, and I was all about, it's okay, I'll just keep thinking about it and figuring a way. And for some reason, in those dark moments, my obsessions became thoughts about these far-off communities, like what actually goes on there, what happens in these places. And as destiny will have it, within the same period, in my country, we had a crisis, and most of you guys know about the crisis. The ongoing Anglophone crisis has been going on for about 7 years now. But basically, just for context, there was an Anglophone community, that's the minority, and then the majority is the Francophone community. And the Anglophones felt like they were not being treated right. They tried to have a couple of protests, and they were, worked on by the government, and they decided to escalate what they were doing, and it became a full-blown crisis that has been going on for 7 years now. And so I was in the midst of the pain from my past, of losing my parents, losing patients that were constantly coming from far-off communities, and then in an environment of a crisis where all I hear every day, this cousin was kidnapped, or this friend of yours, this happened to this person, or... So it was a very dark moment in the chapter of my life. I really didn't know what to do. I was quite depressed. And I found a relief in a call when I saw a job opportunity by an organization called Reach Out. And they were actually looking for doctors to go and work in communities which had really been affected by the crisis, where hospitals were not functional, there were no healthcare practitioners, and they needed these doctors to form a mobile clinic and go and give emergency services. And for me, I felt like, wow, this is it. I can get away from all the pain for a moment, or I could just create a facade and just go somewhere and just be away from the whole world. And so I opted for that particular job I was taking. And funny enough, they sent me to the toughest community. This was a Umojok in a place called Manfe. It was the most affected by the crisis. Initially, I was scared. But again, because of all what I was going through, I just said, you know what, I'm going to go. And so I moved into this community with pain, with depression, just looking for something else to do to forget about all what I was going through. And my obsession, because in a typical humanitarian setting, this was a very local community. We didn't have light, so we had to use a generator to have light like 5 hours every day. We didn't have any internet connection. Internet connections usually came like about 5 hours late in the night. We didn't have any source of water, so we had to go to like streams and then we boil the water. But this was a typical life. And so living from the city where I had like my phone, social media, I came into this context where I had more time to reflect on my life. I had more time to get so obsessed about work. I couldn't go drinking anymore because it was a typical humanitarian context. And so all I did was work and self-reflections, work and self-reflections. And again, because the work required me to go into communities, these far-off communities, it started making me really shift from this individual doctor to more of a community doctor. So I started going to these communities and trying to understand how I could penetrate them, because I didn't have a choice. It was a humanitarian context. I had to learn on how the community can accept you, start learning again about culture, the practices, the values you see in these communities. And for a moment, I started shifting from that individual doctor to more of a community doctor who started doing things quite differently. This particular chapter ended with some light, because at the end of the day, with this, a lot of the self-reflection I did, I decided to go back to my local community and reopen the clinic my dad had. In addition to that, the community I was working in Umojok, they were grateful for the services I did, and they rewarded me with a little token of land. And so for me, you know, most doctors will say this, it's not really always about the money reward, but when a patient really tells you thank you, or a community can come back to you and say, you know what, we appreciate what you did, it means the world to you. So those moments were some amount of light, and they helped to soften some of the pain I was going through, which more or less became more scarce. And so after this experience, I became more of a community doctor. But still, that individual aspect in my private life didn't change. I was still more or less the person who was all about excellence, all about me. How can I make things work for myself? How can I get things working? And I had pretty more or less shut everybody out. I mean, it didn't help because I was working in a humanitarian context where I wasn't really on social media, so my life was just me and my work, me and my work, me and my work. But again, I always say the universe has a lot of different plans for us, and that was the case for me. In my organization forum on a particular day, there was a link that was shared, and I opened this link. And then I saw, you know, a talk about a fellowship, an Atlantic fellowship around health equity. And when I read through, they were talking about, they were looking for people who were courageous, who were ready to go and work with vulnerable people. And a lot of it sounded like me. But then I was scared to apply, because that individual mindset kept on telling me, are you sure you can really interact and get into a place where, you know, you have people with probably different mindsets from you? Are you sure they will accept you? Are you sure you'll be accepted with your ways of doing things? And so I was a little bit reluctant, but for some reason I applied. I sent my essays. And then I was informed that I was actually accepted to come for an interview, a live interview. And on that particular day, I would never forget my interview for this fellowship, by the way. I had to go and carry out some work in a particular very far-off community, but our van, the car we were using, had a breakdown. We slept in the bush that day, and luckily for me, I was able to find a bike coming back to a village, which I took. And this bike carried me through the rain, and I came to the village. And I just ran to a little motel that had internet connections. And I sat there, literally with a T-shirt, my head all soaked in water and everything. And that's how I was turning in for my interview. And for the individualistic person I was, who always felt everything had to be excellent, the way I appear, if I'm coming for an event or anything, I need to show my excellence. Ideas of coming for an interview, I had to be perfect. I had to be dressed in a suit and a tie, looking very serious for the interview. So within me, I already felt like there's no way they're going to take me for this. Let me just give it my best. But then that interview session was with Kate, and immediately we started the session. I started by saying, please permit me apologize. I know I look like a mess, but it's because of this, and she started smiling. And she was like, no. This is welcomed here. And that touched me. I felt like, okay, this is a community that accepts people who are kind of weird, which was strange for me. But then, yes, we went through the process and we had long discussions about what I did. And eventually I was accepted. And fast forward, I had to come to DC. And again, there were concepts about the fellowship that really challenged my way of thinking, because I was a very individualistic person. And so when I came in and they were telling me about concept of health equity, about distributive leadership, about failure in leadership, I was like, I'm not sure about this. I'm not sure this works with what I think. I remember I had conversations with my friend Odoro, and I was like, Odoro, how does this work? Are you sure these concepts work in the real world? Because all I knew was you have my targets, I have my goals, I have to hit my targets and my goals. And so the concept of even accepting to fail was something that was so foreign to me. And I'll never forget Gwen. I think because I always felt that it's difficult for somebody to just genuinely invest in you. They want something back. I actually approached Gwen and I was like, I need you to tell me, what are the expectations for us fellows from this fellowship? And she smiled and she told me, you know what? Just try something. I was like, yes, I know I have to try something, but what do you expect? Like, what are the numbers? What data? What kind of project? I was like, no, it's okay, you could just try. And even if you fail, it's okay. I was like, huh. I was like, huh, okay. So again, the concepts were very foreign to me as a person. And as it would happen, I believe a lot in fate. Within those same moments, I had a promotion within my organization, but there was a complete shift in terms of responsibilities. My previous job, I literally worked with just 5 people, and we'd go with these mobile clinics and carry out activities. And this time around, I had a responsibility of working with close to 1,500 people. So I had about 1,000 community health workers, but they had to be supervised by different stakeholders. And the concept of distributed leadership that I had been taught, I felt like, okay, this looks great. I'm going to use this concept and I'm going to try and apply it and I'll see if this works. And so I came back to my country enthusiastic. I was like, you know what? I have it all figured out. Don't even bother. I got back home. We had volunteers within my organization and I decided to capacitate them. So I had like 15 districts where we had these community health workers, and I trained these volunteers to become district supervisors. And I empowered them and I told them, you know what, go ahead, just be like me. Do the same thing I do for all the districts, but in each of your districts. And I was so positive that it was going to give good results in terms of the numbers that I was going to see. But 3 months into the project, my results were very terrible. In fact, it was worse than even when I started. And so I got so confused. I was like, I started thinking and doubting, and I kept on thinking, I said this. It cannot work. These concepts don't work in the real world. I knew this. But again, as destiny would have it, within these moments of doubts, that was exactly when we had to go to Rwanda. And in Rwanda, they were doing a similar program like what I was doing back home. They had similar challenges, the community health workers there, where the issues with commodities and delayed payments, similarly to what I had. But it was working. And I kept on asking myself, what makes this work in Rwanda? And with the time I spent, I really got to realize that their secret was intrinsic motivation. And so in Rwanda, despite all the challenges that the community workers were having, like mine, they had certain values that they shared together, which came from community, which came from trust, which just came from shared belief, empathy that they believed in. And they were able to come together and shield any other thing that was being thrown at them, whether it was delayed payments, whether it was lack of commodities. This was what kept them going. And at that moment, I said, wow, okay, I would see how this works. And I remember I spoke with Gladys and I spoke with Jose. And I was telling them again the challenge I had. Like, I did this for 3 months. It doesn't work. And they just told me, give it some time. Just give it time, Wilfred. You never know what can happen. So I went back home and I said, you know what? I'll go back to the drawing board. I'll change everything. And this time around, I told myself, I'm not going to look at the numbers. I'm not going to look at the data. I would look at the intrinsic values. So I changed my model of evaluating my team, and it became, what amount of commitment do you have? What amount of values do we share together? What amount of time do you put in for the work? The little values that we could share together. And so that's what I used to evaluate them. We were able to build ground rules where we agreed on things that we agreed on together. And what I realized was, with time, when they understood our North Star, they started seeing things just the way I wanted them to see it. It was no longer about a particular indicator, number, or target that we wanted to have, but it was just showing up to work on time and putting in the effort that you had to put in just for something to happen. And behind the scenes, I was observing the numbers and the data, and what I realized was that we had a progressive improvement in all our indicators. And that was the biggest revelation for me within this fellowship here. Coming from a place of a lot of capitalistic words where we are all about, the goals, the targets, achieving this, achieving that. What we forget is that the foundation of all these things is actually the human being. And it's actually human values. It's actually in empathy, in love, inclusivity, the values we share. And to quote Chuck Finley, one of the quotes I really love was what Marcus had mentioned, that the best investment he did was really in people. To me, before coming for the fellowship, when I heard this quote, I always thought, it's investing finances in us and, it's about the financial investment. But I actually had a revelation and I realized, in reality, this investment was not about the finance. It was about values. It was about him instilling values around the globe. And in addition to that, one thing which I realized, which even changed my concept of Ubuntu, before the fellowship, I felt Ubuntu meant I am because we are. And I felt it meant I am someone because the people make me that person. But my understanding shifted because I got to realize that when you are a leader, the real definition of Ubuntu is that you have to make the people around you, like you. And so the we are like me is because I have shared values to these people who have become like me. So it's almost like that one individual who have multiplied and we become one, but together. And this was the biggest revelation for me within the fellowship. I wanted to really thank you guys all. I think I'll start with the incredible team behind that we don't always talk about. Gwen, for being so meek and so powerful as a leader. I would never forget your advice about failure, a concept that I battled a lot with. And I would always carry that forward, accepting to fail as I move forward. Salam, my sister from Ethiopia, the one who won't sleep until all of us are sleeping, who would never be happy until we are all happy. I would never forget how much you spoke about this fellowship when we were in Rwanda, the deep conversations we had, the fears and the worries you had. In those moments, all I saw was passion. And I want you to know that at times, impact, just like me, who was looking at the numbers, it's not always about the numbers, but at times it's really about the values you can instill in people. To Olivia, silent but super committed to her work. I've never seen somebody who is always on time, texting us, telling us to join meetings every single time. I would never forget watching you actually have this reflective moment around colonization and the impact that your context had around it. To Kadi, my sister from Senegal, to me, you were my source of pride. To see how far you have come, despite where you come from, it's actually an inspiration for me. And I just want to thank you so much for inspiring me. To Kate, who unfortunately isn't here, she was actually my spiritual guide. She remained that voice that helped me throughout my journey of transformation. To Shadow as well, who isn't here, she was the first person who actually held my hand and took me around the US and really spoke to me about the injustices around inequity and really gave me a different view about that. I really want to thank her. And to the others, Janice, Anne Butler, Beth, Moira, Tamara, and Sharon White. I really want to say a big thank you. You guys are not here today, but you make a very big part of this team and helped us immensely. And to the best cohort, who actually have become my family, who are the only people who I can talk to like this, who I can tell my darkest secrets, who I don't know many people who know about this. These things I share with you guys today. I want to thank you. You have been able to take a man who, just as someone said yesterday, was broken, a broken vessel, and mold him into somebody who's ready to face the world. Thank you.